Falcha, everyone, which is a way that my Irish family in their Irish language would say welcome. Today I am going to do part 1 of a Q&A. I think I'm going to divide this into about 5 parts. I have screenshot all your questions that you sent in as promised a couple of weeks ago now, so apologies for the delay. But as promised, I have screenshot all your questions and I am going to endeavor to answer all of them. I have categorized them into about 8 parts, but 3 of the last ones are a little bit small, so I think I can amalgamate them into one part. So for part 1, there is 30 questions and they are all basically personal questions. And then the other subjects center around things like culture, modest fashion, poetry, a few random ones, religion, social media, and childhood trauma. So without further ado, let's get into all 30 of these questions. Love your positivity. Can you share how you stay motivated and juggle many goals at once? Thanks. I think this is the best and biggest compliment that I ever get online. When people compliment my energy or my smile, it is the nicest thing anyone could ever be complimented for, I think. So thank you so much. In terms of how I stay motivated and juggle many goals, perhaps there's a name for my personality type, I'm not sure. I am a very routinely structured, organized type of person. So I find the only way that I manage my goals or manage anything in my life in general is to have a routine. My entire life is routined, it is itemized down to every single day. So I used to itemize my months and weeks, and then I got so meticulous with it that I even now itemize my days. For context, I am self-employed, which means I am accountable for every aspect of my life entirely. So not just the usual things, but also everything that happens with work. So everything is listed visually in front of me on my calendar for work in my office, as well as another calendar that is in my bedroom, as well as one that I have in my diary. So aside from having my entire life itemized on calendars that are visually up in my room, both in my office and my bedroom, where I can see everything from a day-to-day basis, I also have a diary that I schedule on a Monday at the start of every work week. So I take my Sunday to relax, and then come Monday, I wipe off the whiteboard, turn the page in my diary, and then write out both in my diary so I have it with me tangibly anywhere that I go. And then also, so I can see it visually on my whiteboard, I write out everything that needs to be done for that week. I also have on my itemized life routine goals for that year. So I'll reprint these routines at the start of every year and even during the year if anything changes. But I have goals up there that I want to achieve, and I will mark them off as I do so. So basically, long story short, I itemize my life. Everything is written down in front of me, and so I can visually see what it is I need to be working on, what I haven't done enough of, what I have done enough of, etc. So I hope that answers your question on goals. So basically, everything is quite visual for me to see and keep myself accountable for. In regards to motivation, I'm sure many people can feel like this. My levels of motivation go up and down and up and down, and there are days where I feel I could conquer the entire world, and then there are other days where I want to crawl into bed and roll up into a ball and just cry. Let's be honest, but in general, for the most part, I keep myself motivated, ironically, through the goals that we just discussed, but also by comparison with myself. Emphasis on with myself. I strongly do not recommend you comparing yourself to anyone. It is a horrible habit to go down. It's essentially, if you like, in terms of a metaphor, such an abominable rabbit hole. But I will do a comparison with my own self. That is something I have control over. So often when I lack motivation on certain days and I'm like, do you know what? I just don't know why I'm doing this because I feel like I'm not getting anywhere with it. I reflect on where I've come, be it in the last month, even in the last year, in the last several years, and that appreciation for growth that you will inevitably see, whether it be on a small or large scale, growth nonetheless. When you are able to think about that and to actually appreciate your own growth, that keeps me motivated. That keeps me on the track of progression. A lot of people say that comparison isn't a good thing, but I do feel that when I compare myself to myself, that embeds me in a huge sense of gratitude, which leads me into the next thing. Gratitude is a massive drive for my motivation for me, but I'll get to that later because it will come up in another question. But being motivated comes a lot from comparing what I have done and reminding myself I've already done this, that therefore is testament to the fact that I can keep going and keep achieving more. So mixing that comparison in with the visual representation of my goals in writing, combining them together drives me for the most part on a day-to-day basis. Question number 2. What are your hobbies? Do you sew, knit, crochet, etc.? I'm not sure why this question stumped me so much, because when I saw it, I was like, do you know what are my hobbies? Because my hobbies used to be things like playing the piano and making content, filming short videos, etc. But they have both become jobs. So I don't really know if I can still call them hobbies when they are a part of my careers. So I am a piano tutor now, and I am also a content creator now. So in the past, I probably would have said playing piano and, making for the fun of it, film. I don't know why I paused there. Making short content. However, those things aside, I do love, as an English teacher, to read. I am a huge fan of reading all sorts of different genres. Right now, I was reading the Queen's speeches, which I should never have bought this book. This wasn't the book I intended to get. And then when I got home and realized, I can't believe I did this, but realized the mistake that I made, I was like, you know what? It's fine. It was on a massive discounted sale. I'll just read it. But it's not the most interesting book. I had meant to get her biography. However, I am someone who will finish a book I started whether I like it or not. Maybe that's a bad thing, I don't know. But that was what I was reading. Now I am reading Evergreen by Lydia Millen. I got this as a part of my 10-year anniversary present to celebrate when I ran away from home. And it's really good because she is a content creator. So reading it as a content creator and getting someone who's been in the industry for a really long time and is quite successful at it, getting her insight has been very wholesome for me. Reading aside, I'm not really sure what you could say my hobbies are. I love history, I love classical music, so I suppose anything to do with those things. But then again, they're not really specific hobbies, are they? So I like to read. I love to walk, actually. I am an avid walker and I wish I had more time. I think I need to dedicate more time to doing walks out in nature. I absolutely love the feeling of going for a brisk walk out in nature. Is shopping a hobby? because if it is, I do enjoy a good shop, especially during sale season. I can't believe I'm saying this as a part of a hobby, but specifically with things like shoes and jewelry. I love my accessories more than anything, and especially shoes. So maybe shoe shopping is a bit of a hobby here. I guess I should wrap it up there. If I can't say reading and playing piano, I would say reading and walking in nature, and also actually languages. Just like I mentioned, I love history. I also love languages, and I do love to spend a lot of my spare time on Duolingo trying to learn a language. I spent a lot of the last year trying to learn Arabic, which, for another question that I will answer later that asks about that, I will explain. But I have now moved on to Italian because Arabic was rather difficult with that app. But I have now moved on to Italian because I learned Italian when I was in high school. So there's already some foundational knowledge there. But yeah, learning languages. I'll add that to the list. What is that? 4 things? I can sew, by the way, just for reference to your question. Out of the things you mentioned, I can sew. I wouldn't call it a hobby. It's more of a thing when I need to mend something. So it's more like a maintenance type thing. All right, I am 28 years old, but I feel like I'm 100. You smile a lot, have such grace and good energy. What is your secret? Love you. Much love and thank you again. I love getting compliments like this. It means a lot. First of all, I can relate to you about feeling 100. I'm 32. I'm not 28. I am 32, so I'm 4 years older than you, but I understand what you mean about feeling 100. Sometimes I wake up, and I've mentioned before on my vlogs, I have problems with my hip flexors at the moment. I have problems with things like my potential endometriosis, etc. So I appreciate, but How do I manage that? Remember how I mentioned earlier that gratitude is a huge part of my life. It helps me with my motivation and my goals. And I think if I were to pinpoint anything to do with my energy, whenever you guys ask me how my energy is the way that it is, there would be more than one reason, but I think one of the biggest reasons is gratitude. I will touch on this more when I talk about childhood trauma as a subject for the Q&As, but gratitude saved my life. When I was younger, I read a book called The Secret, and now I fully appreciate and understand why that book has so much skepticism surrounding it. Understandably. But for an 18-year-old that was living in an abusive environment between my mother and her boyfriend, it was horrendous. And then to be gifted this book, ironically by my mother, she read it and then gave it to me. It was a lifesaver. I don't think my mum appreciated what she was doing when she gave it to me, because she definitely wasn't well intended by giving it to me. However, I read this book and my life changed. I had my eyes opened to the world of gratitude, to the world of trying to help yourself when it comes to your management of your emotions. It talked about things like the law of attraction, about energy, about the way you are, whatever you bring about, whatever you think about, you bring about, so to speak. Now, like I already alluded to, whatever you wish to think about these sorts of topics is entirely, of course, up to you. For me, in that environment, I went, do you know what? I'm 18, I'm struggling, I am so unhappy. And at the time as well, you must appreciate that I didn't fully understand that I was in an abusive environment. I was so manipulated into thinking that everything was my fault that I just blamed my unhappiness on myself. So I was open to the idea of doing anything that was going to help change that. So to cut a long story short, because I know I'm going to talk more in depth about this in the other video I do on childhood trauma. However, I put a piece of paper up behind my door and I made a promise to myself, thanks to this book, that every night before I went to bed, rather than crying myself to sleep, which is what would often happen, I would write a minimum of 10 things down on this piece of paper that I was grateful for. This was a struggle initially because you're 18 years old, being abused by your mother and her boyfriend, you're not allowed to do anything. What are you grateful for? I had to dig so deep, and I dug deep to the point of realizing that actually, as horrible as everything else in my life externally was, I had other things that I could and should be grateful for, i.e. my inherent health. I was waking up every morning, and I'm still waking up every morning, and I have the ability to get up and use my legs. I have a heart that is still beating. I have eyes that are still seeing. All of these things that you, on the average day-to-day basis, you don't stop and think about. And so by digging deep, I started to realize, hang on a minute, I have all these other things. And by realizing that, it led to a waterfall, figuratively speaking, of other things that I realized I could be grateful for. I started to realize I should be grateful for my access to education, for my own love, consequently to learning, my own love for learning rather. The list goes on, and I did that for years until I ran away from home when I was 22, 4 years later, and I still do that until today. I just do it a little bit differently. On my side table as well is a tiny little diary. Now, I can't use a diary this small on a day-to-day basis. It's a bit hard when you're self-employed. However, I do use a tiny diary for my gratitude. This is now converted into my little gratitude journal, where every night before I go to sleep, I write down under each date a minimum of 5 to 10 things that I am grateful for. And it is probably my biggest, I suppose that you can't say secret, especially when you consider I'm announcing it to the world now, but it is my biggest tool, I would say, for keeping my energy in check, keeping my energy happy. I don't know if I could be as happy as I am now if I didn't go on this journey of gratitude. Gratitude has wholeheartedly saved my life. It is the pinnacle of my prayer. Every time I sit down to pray as a Christian, I begin my prayers with counting down a minimum of 10 things that I am grateful for too. So not only do I have at nighttime a gratitude journal where I write down at least 5 to 10 things, I also start my prayers every morning with 10 things. So often in my vlogs, you guys that if you do or do not watch them, you may see that I sit there, and when I go to pray, my fingers are up like this. Now, this is how some of us pray anyway, but you will see my hands like this and my fingers one by one going down, and that is me counting down the things that I am grateful for every day. It is something that takes time to embed in your routine. It's something that you might be really excited to start doing initially and then realize you start to have to really force the issue because the excitement, the novelty, so to speak, wears off. But I don't feel that you can fully appreciate the benefits of gratitude if you don't do this regularly. Now, don't think that since I was 18 and am now 32, that I have been doing this consistently every single day. No, but I have been doing it for the majority. I have taken days, weeks where I have neglected to do this, but I always come back to it. I have these times where I start to feel down and I'm like, what's going on? I've been doing so well and now all of a sudden I'm feeling a bit down, and then I realize most of the time that coincides with the fact that I haven't been doing my gratitude practices. And then I get back into it, and within a few days my spirits are lifted and perspective for me is just realigned in the right way, and thus, to answer your question, enabling the energy that a lot of you, I hope, are seeing in a positive light. I don't even think I worded that sentence right at the end there. Seeing the energy that I have in a positive light. Next, what is your favorite comfort food? Now, because you asked specifically about food, I will answer the question accordingly. However, I will preface with saying that when I want to consume something for comfort, it is first and foremost always going to be tea. My favorite drink in the whole world is Irish breakfast tea, English breakfast tea in general, specifically Irish breakfast tea, but I have to say that. Not really, I genuinely do love it, but I am an absolute addict when it comes to tea. It is the thing that you will know I am having. Maybe it could be physically or emotionally a hard day because my tea consumption skyrockets. After tea, I would say my next favorite drink is chocolate milk, because sometimes as a comfort thing, I will turn to that. But I digress. In terms of food, I love soup. So from my Middle Eastern culture, I love things like shorbat adas, which is basically a lentils soup. And I also love mlkhiyeh. Mlkhiyeh is I think they call it in English, Egyptian spinach. It's a stew, so to speak, that is boiled in a bone broth with these Egyptian spinach leaves, so we call it mlkhiyeh, and served on a bed of rice. I love this more than any dish, and I love soup. So this is a stew, mlkhiyeh, so it is kind of soupy as well, but also to give a nod to my Irish side, for anyone that doesn't know, I'm half Middle Eastern, Palestinian specifically, and half Irish. So we have in both cultures these sorts of dishes that I absolutely adore. And in my Irish culture, we love soup with brown bread. And anytime I want a nice, comforting thing to eat, I will always turn to soup. I remember being in Ireland, and everywhere we stopped to eat, I was so happy because without fail, every menu had soup with brown bread. Some sort of soup, but soup nonetheless, and it was beautiful. So in summary, I would say definitely tea, but then soup of some sort, be it of an Irish reference or of a Palestinian reference. Regardless, I love soup. I think there's some sort of trend here, having like a hot liquidy type of beverage or food. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. When are you and Musa getting married? I think there were several questions that showed up with a similar idea, a similar intention when it came to what they were asking. The short answer is when we are ready. I know you all mean well when you ask this question. I really do. But the reality of the situation is we will do so only when we are ready. If we were ready, I would like to think that we would have been married by now. But life is what it is, in the sense that it is quite challenging. And I am someone who believes that certain things need to be in place before you can get married. For example, you need to own your own home. Now, I know not everybody would agree with me there, but these are things that ideally I would like. And I know I said things, even though I'm only mentioning one thing, buying a home, but there are other things as well. But in short, when we are ready, I really hope that I am not disappointing anyone by giving you such a simplistic answer. But when Musa asks, first and foremost, And when we are ready and able, we will definitely, inshallah, which means God willing in Arabic, we will, God willing, get married. I will assure you of that. Literally the next 2 to 3 questions are all asking the same thing. Okay, next question. Hi, do you know how beautiful your smile is? One of the most sincerest smile and joy I see on a face. Other than this, thank you so much. Other than this question, I would like to also ask, what are your 2 to 3 wishes / goals for the rest of 2024? Okay, if you are being specific to just 2024, what do we only have? I think like 4 months or so, less than. Sorry, I think we have like 3.5 months left of this year. First, I know this is something that's probably going to take a lot of you by surprise because I have been working on this for the last 10 years, but I want more of a grip by the end of the year on my mental health. I probably should talk about this more, but I have, yes, spent the last 10 years healing from my childhood trauma, but there are a lot of things that happened in those 22 years that I haven't addressed. I've spent the bulk of my therapy healing from what happened between my mother and I, and that will be an ongoing journey. Yes, I appreciate I have PTSD, that's post-traumatic stress disorder, and for anyone that doesn't know, it is something that never goes away. It's just something you learn to manage. So I know that it will always be there. But there are things like the trauma that happened between her boyfriend and I, and other other things that happened as a consequence that I haven't addressed, I've been avoiding. So I definitely need to start therapy to do with what happened between my stepdad and I, and I'm so sorry to be blunt, so just trigger warning in advance, but that was sexual abuse. And I'm just not sure why I've left it so long. I guess maybe I did what I felt I was ready for. But in short, because I will talk more, of course, later on, but for now, getting more of a grip on my mental health, trying to be that bit better by the end of the year. Second, working on my book. I launched this at the start of the year to the world, and I think I have a bit of imposter syndrome. No, I know I have imposter syndrome, and I had such a wonderful reaction to it. So please do not think that I'm not being grateful for it, because I am so grateful. Almost every single night when I write down what I'm grateful for, this features in my gratitude diary entries almost always. However, I started to feel a little bit like guilty for advertising this on my socials. I felt like people followed me for different types of content, and trying to put something that I was financially benefiting from if people purchased, made me feel bad. So I would like to try and not feel that way, and I would like to try and progress my career as an author. And this is a goal that I will probably have not just for 2024, but for the rest of my life. I am so proud that I have something out there in the world that I wrote. I am so proud that I have finally started to share my poetry with the world. So I guess that would probably lead into another one of my goals that I have for 2024. And that's now the third one, because you asked for 2 to 3. But it would be to progress my presence online as a poet. I love poetry. Don't think I don't like the content I already do, because I absolutely do. However, I am very ready to be more of a poet online. I would definitely like to share that kind of work online. So, what did I say? Working on my mental health more substantially, and that comes with a lot of consequential things. I don't know why I'm struggling with that word, but basically fixing a lot of the issues that I feel I have when it comes to my mental health in my relationships, be it with my partner and my family, personally, etc., and a whole bunch of other things. So mental health, working on being more of an author, and working on content creation as a poet. Those 3. All right, moving on. I knew I had to divide these into parts, these videos, because I talk so much in response to just one question. I can't keep anything short and sweet. How did you find your way to living in Australia? Is that where either of your parents relocated, or did you just decide one day to go yourself? I didn't decide one day to go myself. I have been born here. I don't know why I worded that like that either. I am born here, and I have been here my entire life. except for I think it was about 6 months that I lived in London, where I decided that I wanted to go and work abroad for a while. It was a dream of mine for a long time. But other than that, I am an Australian, mate, through and through. I appreciate my accent is a little bit of a throw off there. I don't have a stereotypical Australian accent, which is another discussion unto itself. But my parents come from, my father from Ireland, my mother from Palestine. Their families migrated here for different reasons. My mother's family because of the war, and my father's family because of health reasons. And long story short, they met at work, my parents, and they happened to have located their families in the same area, roughly speaking, met at work, got married, and had me. So I don't know if I took another long-winded way of answering a simple question, but I hope that answers your question. What inspired you to live on a farm? I've been pretty keen to buy one in the future. I wish I could say that something inspired me, but the thing is, this isn't my farm. I actually live on my grandparents' farm. This is a retired chicken farm. My grandparents have been living here for, I don't know, decades now. Anyway, it's definitely longer than I've been alive. And this is their home. My grandparents took me in. My father picked me up when I ran away from home, and my grandparents offered me a place to live with them here. So this is not my place. However, I will say, in regards to that question, in the future, I hope that I can still be living on land, not necessarily a farm, but at least a cottage or something of the like. And if you're talking in regards to inspiration, that's probably my Irish culture kicking in there, because the whole notion of living on a cottage and having all the greenery around you with farm animals, even if it's not a farm itself, but farm animals, you know, having ducks and chickens and being able to get your own eggs, maybe even having a cow and milking your own cow, etc., is something I love. Whether that be inspiration from my Irish culture or even more specifically from my Irish family, because they are farmers and we come from a line of farmers. Actually, if you trace back my lineage in Ireland, we are all farmers on both my grandfather and grandmother's sides. But I don't know whether that would be the case, or do I know, sorry, if that would be the case otherwise. I don't know, but I would have to guess, I would have to assume that that's probably what would be my inherent inspiration for that. Did your boyfriend move from Melbourne to Sydney? Now, unofficially, yes. Officially, no. Has he officially moved to Sydney? No. Unofficially, when you consider the amount of time that he spends up here, yes. I mean, the fact that his girlfriend is up here has definitely influenced that. But he also has a lot of his family that live in Sydney, and also his brother moved here many, many years ago, long before he ever started coming to Sydney this regularly. So I guess that helps the situation unofficially, but that's not to say that officially it won't happen in the future. But he is pretty much unofficially in Sydney, but he definitely still calls Melbourne home. How do you deal with anger? This is such an intriguing question because it made me think about my own state of anger, because I don't actually think I'm someone who gets very angry, at least not easily anyway. I think I could probably get into a very rarely random fit of rage for some unknown reason, but in general, I'm not an angry person. I'm an emotional person. So I think in terms of dealing with an outburst of an emotion in excess, because I feel like that's what you're really asking here, mine would be emotionally, you know, being overtly sad and crying. I cry like you would not believe. There is almost no day that goes by where I don't cry. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not sure what it is with me, especially that time of the month. When that time of the month comes around, I am a wreck. I cry all the time. So in terms of how I deal with that, I let it out. I am not someone who bottles up at all. I am a firm believer in just letting the emotion be what it is, getting it out of my system. And then perhaps depending upon the scenario, every scenario could be different or is different, I often return to my practice of gratitude, no joke. If I am overtly emotional for whatever reason, I will then come back and start going through my counts of gratitude, because it is such an instant pick me up. It helps me so much, like I've already mentioned. But in terms of anger, because you specifically asked about that, if I can think about any example of me being angry, and I suppose maybe it could be with, which again doesn't happen often, and I appreciate because that I am very lucky because of that. If someone were to have intentionally wronged me, not unintentionally, because I can cope with that, I think, quite well, not to toot my own horn or anything, but if it were intentional, I don't think I cope with that very well. I think in those scenarios I get quite angry, but the anger, I would say, lasts very fleetingly because it turns into a cry session. So how do I cope with anger? I would say by crying. I allow it to release itself in terms of energy from my system through tears. So again, I'm so sorry to be so circular in my answer and bring it back to the same thing. I deal with that just by letting it be what it is and focusing if I feel that that emotion has gone on for too long, because you shouldn't try and deny yourself of your feelings and mask them, because that's how you start to bottle these things up and then they explode. So I sorry to be so long-winded. I deal with it by letting it be, letting it out, and then if it goes for too long, I start to focus on my gratitude count. And if that doesn't work, I only just thought of this actually, if that doesn't work, I put something on the television, some sensory orientated thing like music. So for me, it would be classical music, or even my favorite songs, like for example, something from Ed Sheeran, or even Celine Dion, etc. Or my favorite TV show like Mrs. Brown, and that will also help me. It will fix my emotional state. I hope that answers your question. So letting it out, crying, and then some sort of comfort in the background. What are your 3 favorite words? I have no idea. I mean, I am Australian, so I feel like I want to say she'll be right. In Australia, we have a lot of sayings, as do every culture, every culture. And in Australia, we have a saying, she'll be right. You'll often hear a true blue saying something along those lines, she'll be right, mate. And I'm so sorry for doing such a discredit to our accent. Well, at least the stereotypical accent that everyone thinks that we have. But I think, something along those lines of, it is what it is, which I know is not 3 words, but something along those lines where whenever something happens, you say to yourself, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be, or, if it's not over, and no, it's not over, sorry. It's not, what's the other saying? I can't believe I've just gone blank on that saying. It's a saying I know I use a lot, and I know it doesn't seem that way. But basically, any saying that in the moment helps me cope with something that feels like I am vulnerable because it's out of my control. Something like, she'll be right. It is what it is. That's the other saying. All is well that ends well. And if it's not well, it isn't the end. That's way more than 3 words. But all is well that ends well, etc. So basically, a lot of times I will be in a scenario where I'll be like, oh my gosh, I wish that this had happened this way. And I will often remind myself, she'll be right. It is what it is. It doesn't matter. It's out of your control. There's no point fussing over it. Actually, that reminds me. I have a 3 favorite words in a saying that I really like. Respond, don't react. Several months ago, I heard someone talking about how you should respond to something, not react to something, which essentially means that you pause, take a breath, and think about what you're about to do before you inherently respond. Now, I know that sometimes, hence why I use the word inherently, you can't help it. Your responses are so instinctive that whatever happens, whatever reaction, just happens. But I think respond, don't react is so important to think about, and hence why I'm now coming to eventually say that it's probably my favorite 3 words, because it really teaches me in moments of stress and anxiety to stop and try my best to respond to something in a thought out, as calm as possible manner, as opposed to reacting. Is there any novel that changed your life forever? I've already alluded to this before when I talked about The Secret. That book definitely changed my life because it saved my life. It taught me gratitude, and as a consequence, helped me become who I am today. And who I am now, the person I have become, is the reason that I didn't make certain choices that I don't want to be too explicit about in this video when I was younger, which was very much a prominent feature in my thought process when I was younger. Aside from that book, I would probably have to say I'm such a millennial and I love it. The Harry Potter series. I needed escapism growing up. I didn't know it, but I needed it. And growing up, the only thing that gave me any sense of escapism were those Harry Potter books. They were so fantastical in every sense of the word that every time I opened those pages, I was able to escape mentally out of the reality that I was unfortunately in and into one that I was fortunately able to read. I know that's more than one answer, and I could probably keep going because, like I also mentioned earlier, I do love to read. But those two, I know the second one is a set, but The Secret and then the Harry Potter books would definitely have to be my answer. Next, do you have favorite music artists? Also, I have alluded to the fact that I love, in terms of music, I love classical music, I love Ed Sheeran, and I love Celine Dion. I have loved classical music since I was a teenager. I grew up in a household where it was very present in our everyday to-day life. My mum loves classical music, which I suppose maybe initially was the reason I was so against it, because of that negative relationship we have and my therefore inclination to not want to like things that she liked, or likes I should say. But that aside, I do actually love classical music. I have made peace with the fact that it is okay to like things that she also likes, and classical music is something that brings me so much happiness. Since I was a teenager, I have fallen in love with, more specifically, Baroque music. Baroque music actually is a genre that predates the classical genre, and I love Bach, I love Vivaldi, I love Corelli, everything Baroque. Everything Baroque, including music, but also things like art and the fashion that was around back then. I love the history from the Baroque and the Renaissance era. They fuel my whole soul. I don't know what it is about those eras, but they just excite my imagination in ways that nothing else does. If I am to give a more modern answer, which I feel is only right given that it is 2024, I love Ed Sheeran with my whole soul as well. Ed Sheeran's music, probably, I'm really guessing here, but probably because of the English-Irish influences. I love when he has those songs about Irish culture and English culture. It makes me so, so happy, especially when you hear songs like Castle on the Hill or Galway Girl. They are amazing. And Celine Dion. Now, why do I mention Celine Dion? Because she is the reason, well, actually, James Horner is the reason that I started to learn how to play piano. When I was 7 years old, I watched Titanic, fell madly, absolutely in love with the film, and the music stole my heart. And so I decided I wanted to learn piano so that I could play that song, My Heart Will Go On, the soundtrack, the theme song, on piano. And therefore, thanks to Celine Dion and James Horner, who is the actual composer, I learned how to play piano. And that is probably one of my favorite songs even up until now. I am now 32, so since I was 7, that's such a long time. And a lot of other works that I later discovered by James Horner, including all the other pieces of music that were played in the film Titanic itself. So classical music, specifically Bach and Vivaldi, and then Ed Sheeran and Celine Dion. When did you first start liking ducks? When Saoirse and Darwish ran away and came and found themselves in my bedroom and backyard. I was never actually a fan of ducks before. Not that I didn't like them, I just had no specific inclination towards them. Not in the way that I like dogs or camels or hedgehogs. Those are probably my favorite animals. But it was just something that, you know, when I went for a walk around a lake or something, I saw, admired, took a photo, and that would be the end of it. But then when these ducks ran away from the duck farm that is next door to us and found themselves in my bedroom, I fell in love. So it's just been a little bit of an accidental journey in that regard. So long story short, only I would say about, what was it, February that they did that they ran away? I think it was February. So about 8 months ago now, because it's now September. So roughly speaking, about 8 months ago. How are you feeling? I hope you are well. Thank you. That is such a nice question. I am feeling today very well, thank you. I am very grateful for that, and I hope you are feeling well too. What was your experience in high school? Okay. High school was a funny one, and I want to preface what I'm going to say with, not that this at all excuses anything or makes anything justifiable, but when you come from an abusive environment, when you have childhood trauma, as a child, that presents itself in rather interesting ways. And I had issues that I fully believe were all as a consequence of what was happening to me in my home environment. And my basic needs weren't being met. And so when I would come to school, I wasn't, for want of a better word, normal. I wasn't like majority of the other children. And that was both in primary school and high school. But I suppose in high school, it had been years at this point where this was the case, and it was just getting worse and worse. So, like I said, for context, for, want of a preface, I already wasn't the best person, the best version of myself as a kid in school. And now that is by no means an excuse and by no means a necessity for high school to be a bad experience for someone. But I got bullied a lot. I wasn't allowed to shave. I wasn't allowed to wax. I think I was halfway through high school before my mum started letting me take the armpit hair off of myself and off of my legs, and even then retracted it, and spent years where she wouldn't let me do it and then allowed me to do it again at the last couple of years of schooling. It was a whole thing. My monobrow that I had was something she let me take on and off and on and off, and it was a whole thing. I wasn't allowed to dress a certain way. I wasn't allowed to, and these things are not part of the abuse, but it was just an element of her strictness that coincided with her being abusive, because I would like to say that being an abusive parent does not equate to a strict parent. The two are not the same. But in terms of her strictness, I was never allowed to go out with friends. I was never allowed to have friends outside of school. I couldn't build those relationships. I wasn't allowed to wear makeup. I wasn't allowed to straighten my hair. I wasn't allowed to have any of those, things that were considered to be on trend at the time, which fine, it is what it is. Everyone has reasons for those things. Mine was, she just was very strict and didn't allow them. And for want of a better word, that made me feel shite. So mix in the inability to do things that my friends are doing, which for any kid is horrible. You feel left out. Mix that in with what's happening at home. And then the fact that I'm being bullied in school. School was horrendous. School was absolutely horrendous. Now, at the same time, I did find that school was a great sense of escape for me, because despite the bullying, it was still a better place than at home, because it was a place where I wasn't being physically abused. I wasn't being sexually abused or verbally abused. I was being emotionally abused because of the bullying, but verbal abuse, I'm referencing, the swearing and the name calling, etc. I wasn't name called in school, so to speak. I was emotionally picked on for the way I behaved, etc. I was laughed at and whatnot. But yeah, high school in short, I do not want to make this, because I know there are already other categories that I have coming that won't be so great emotionally. I don't want to make this one a sad Q&A, but it definitely wasn't the best time of my life. Having said that, the silver lining is that education has been a great escape for me. I found my Italian classes to be something I would run to. I loved going to Italian class. I loved going to history class, and I loved going to textiles class, which, if anyone terms that by a different name around the world, because I think even within our own states in Australia, we have different names for that class. It's basically where you learned how to sew, how to make clothes. I loved those classes, and they were a great sense of escapism for me. So horrible in the sense of the bullying, but amazing in the sense of education. Do you like to paint? If so, what types of paint do you like, and what do you paint? No, unfortunately, I do not paint. It's never really something that I have been interested in. It's something that I have said, fleetingly in the past, randomly rather, that I wish I could do. There would be moments where I might be staring excuse me, at a work of art and be like, oh, wouldn't that be nice as an outlet? The way I have piano and poetry, wouldn't it be nice to be able to paint? But it's not something I've ever been greatly interested in. I would say though that there are artists that I like. Now, again, I'm not a huge art nerd, so I'm not that knowledgeable on the topic, but I know I like artists like Cott, Gainsborough, Rembrandt, Monet. Who doesn't like Monet? But I'm not well versed enough to have discussions on these topics properly, so I can't do your question justice with an answer other than to simply say I know in the past when I've seen artworks from these artists that I like. I also know what I don't like. Unfortunately, I know I'm going to cop a lot of slack for this. I'm not a huge fan of Picasso surrealism, so to speak. I'm pretty sure Picasso fits into surrealism. I could be wrong. Please don't have my head for this if I get it wrong, but there is a lot of art that I unfortunately don't appreciate, and that's just me being honest. But I do love anything from the Baroque era, the Renaissance era, like I mentioned. So a lot of the paintings I see, the artwork that I see on ceilings in a lot of the old buildings, the old architecture, that I adore. But can I paint? No. Next, when you're having a less than perfect day, what is your routine like to work through it? Much love, Berna. Much love. Thank you so much. So, what is my routine to go through when I'm having a less than perfect day? Okay, I've already touched on this so much, so I suppose I will summarize it to try and be more articulate. When my day is feeling bad, I will make a cup of tea. I will wear something that makes me feel so comfortable. For example, today I am wearing my Uggs that I got recently. I love them and they're very comfortable, and that helps my mood. I'm not necessarily having a less than perfect day today, but I'm not having the biggest high emotionally speaking, and I was feeling anxious about a few things. So made a cup of tea, wore comfy clothes, had Mrs. Brown on in the background this morning. If I didn't have that on, I would have music that I like. I would have my moment to reflect, meditate, I suppose, so to speak, where I would go through the things that I'm grateful for, where I would pray. Something I've not really touched on yet in this video is that prayer helps me a lot too. I try not to talk about religion too much because I know it's not all inclusive. I know it doesn't affect everyone. So the answer I would then be giving would be quite specific. But for me, in this regard, because you've been quite specific towards myself, religion helps me by way of prayer. I am not the most religious person, contrary to popular belief, but admittedly, I am quite spiritual if you think about it from a definition perspective, more so than I am religious. But prayer is a huge importance for me. So when I've got my comfort drink, tea, my comfort clothes, my comfort surround sounds, and I've gone through my gratitude, I will also pray. I will take up a moment to pause and give over my problems to God. This is something I've been taught to do since I was a child, and I feel like even if you're not religious, you can look at it from a meditation standpoint where you release yourself. I've often sat in a yoga class where they have a period of meditation and they talk about releasing the negativity through your fingertips, through your whole being, and it feels amazing. It is the same for me, and I am sure for many other people in prayer, where you are giving your problems over to God, where you feel like you are releasing that energy, that negativity from yourself. Once you've gone through these things, for me, it's a series of things that I've just mentioned, but they are not a simple checklist. Once you've gone through these things, it is a matter of being very conscious of how you're feeling after that. So being accountable, rather than just saying to yourself, I've done the things that I'm supposed to do, like being grateful, listing off the things that make me grateful for my life, praying to God or meditating, having a comfort drink or a comfort meal, or doing something that brings me comfort, like, comfy clothes and a comfort show. Then being consciously accountable. Telling yourself every day when every moment in your day, when a negative thought enters your mind, saying to yourself, I am accountable for how I am feeling. And if I have it within my control, I am going to do what I can to try and rewire that. Now, I have PTSD, so I fully appreciate that that is not always possible. Sometimes these things are out of your control, but to a degree, we can try our best to work on them. When I'm going about my day that I'm feeling not so great in, I will pause in those moments. I've done all these things, and though these moments are still happening, I will pause and I will rewire. I will actively rather think about something else to challenge that thought. So to be more specific, if I am feeling down because I'm like, do you know what? It's already 3 p.m. What have you done with your day? Then I will pause and say to myself, okay, well, these are the things that I've done, and I might not have appreciated how much up until that point that I've actually done in the day. Then if I say to myself, oh, well, that's not as much as you did yesterday or the day before, I will remind myself that there is nothing wrong with having a slower paced day, or maybe a lazy day, if you want to call it that, a rest day. Learning to be kinder to yourself and to appreciate that you're not meant to run at 100% every single day, and rewiring the thoughts that you're having with yourself, rewiring how you are talking to yourself, is also, in my opinion, a game changer and something that really helps you when, like you mentioned, you're having a not so perfect day. Where would you live in the entire world? Where would you not live in the world? Are you from Bankstown, Sydney? Sorry, my throat is getting so dry. I have talked so much, shocker. But I've had to take a cough lolly to try and like soothe my throat so I can keep talking. I still have a few questions to get through. But no, I am not from Bankstown in Sydney. I'm going to assume that the fact that I am half Arab is the reason you asked that. I am from Sydney, but no, I am not from Bankstown. In terms of where I would live in the entire world, if I had all the money in the world, I would probably live right here. Now, you're probably saying, but you're already there. I mean, in the sense that I would buy where I am. I would buy this whole area and keep it as something that I can always come back to. Now, why I say always come back to, because I would also like to live other places as well, but always return to here, always coming back to this place, always coming back to this place to call home. Now, in terms of where I'm coming back from, I would love it to be Ireland or England. I haven't been to Scotland and I've only spent a day in Wales, so I don't know what those parts would be like, but I assume I might feel the same way. When I was in Ireland, I fell in love. Maybe that's just because that is a part of who I, 50% wise, am, and I connected to it in a way that I can't connect in Australia. And I suppose I'll talk more about that in the section of these Q&As where I talk about culture. That's probably the one that I'm going to do next, actually. But I really can't explain to you how much I fell in love with Ireland and how much I fell in love with England. I loved living there. And don't get me wrong, like Australia, it too has its downsides. In England and Ireland, it was definitely the weather, which is not something I had experienced in Australia. But there was so much else. There was culture and history and things that made me feel like the best version of myself. Something that I struggled to feel in Australia. For whatever the reason be, I'm not entirely sure. I have an idea. I have a rough explanation that I think I could give. But to summarize it, I would love to have a home in either Ireland or England, but always also have a home here that I could come back to. In terms of where I would not live, I really don't know. I mean, I suppose I can only talk about the places that I visited because naturally those are the only experiences I can draw on. Where wouldn't I want to live? I could probably give you a broad answer, but not a specific answer. So I wouldn't want to live in a city. Primarily because I can't drive in cities. I get so incredibly anxious driving in cities that I just wouldn't survive. Now, I know you want a specific answer, but I couldn't live in Sydney, as in the city. I live in Sydney, but the city of Sydney. I couldn't live in the city of Melbourne. I couldn't live in the city centre of London. I couldn't live in, and I love London. I mean, wait. I was actually pretty good in London because I relied on public transport. But if I had to drive, forget it. I couldn't live, Jesus Christ, tonight I couldn't live in Paris or Naples. Oh my gosh, the traffic. Paris and Naples, I don't know how there isn't, God forbid, more accidents. The driving. my heart. And Rome, oh my goodness, I feel like even to just be a pedestrian in Rome gave me so much anxiety. There was so much insane traffic that I'm going to say my answer to this question is cities, and specifically almost any city that I have experienced, because they were all crazy busy. All right, next question, a light-hearted one. But would love to know some of your favorite books, albums, musicians, and places you'd love to travel to. I know I've already touched on a lot of these things, so of what I have, I will try and just skim over again. Favorite books. My favorite books will always be the Harry Potter books, but like I said, to skim over that. I also love poetry collections. As I've gotten older, I've become a lot like my auntie actually, and I've started to really like biographies. I find them very inspiring actually, especially when I read the biography of Brendan O'Carroll, who is the director and creator, of Mrs. Brown's Boys, which is my favorite show. And when I read the biography of Ed Sheeran. I also love Philip Pullman's work. I read the trilogy, The Dark Materials, recently, and they were just amazingly well written. In terms of albums, I really can't give you albums for the classical / Baroque musicians that I love, but I do in terms of specific pieces. For Bach, I love his partitas, his violin partitas, even his cello suites. Incredible. For Vivaldi, I love his cello concerto for 2 cellos and his violin concerto for 4 violins. Amazing. For Ed Sheeran, my favorite album is probably his Divide album. I love all the other albums, but I think probably because of all the Irish references in that album, I fell more in love with his work for that group of work, collection of work rather, than any other album. Musicians I've already touched on. I love Ed Sheeran and Celine Dion, and I don't really know who else I could say that I like. I like all music. I'm one of those people that, although I've said to you I love classical and I love Ed Sheeran, Celine Dion, I actually like everything. There isn't much that I don't like. Like, I will listen to Lady Gaga and then I will listen to Edith Piaf all in the same playlist. So I really am okay with just about anything. Places that I would love to travel. I haven't touched on this, so I'll talk about this a bit more. I am probably biased here, but I would love to see more of Europe. And I say biased because it's the place I keep going back to every time I go overseas. And so maybe that is the influence here. Also, the fact that I am half European, I'm half Irish, probably plays a part there too. But I'd love to see more of it. I'd love to see more of what I've already seen. Go back and do more of Ireland, more of England. I want to go see Scotland so bad. And then I would also love to go to the other places that I haven't seen, like Greece and Malta and Croatia. And I would love to just do an all-around whole trip of Europe. That's probably never going to happen in one go, but I just want to see as much of it as is possible. I would truly go back and redo also everything that I've already done. I'd go back and redo France. Not that I did France. Paris. I've been to Paris twice and I only saw Paris, but I would like to go out and see more of the countryside. I'd like to do Italy again, not because I didn't do a lot of Italy. I was in Italy for a week and a half, and not that you could see everything in a week and a half, but I saw a lot. However, I understand better how to travel in Italy now. Italy was the place I found the hardest to be a tourist in. There was so many things that went wrong for us. And now that I understand it better, I would like to go back and give that another go. Where else? Aside from Europe, specifically England, Ireland, Scotland, and definitely Greece, actually, because Greece looks phenomenal. I would love to see Egypt. When I was a child, Egyptology consumed my whole interests. It was the thing I obsessed over the most in primary school, and it carried on into high school and even until now. I love history, specifically ancient Egyptian history, and I would love to just go see everything that was in my books, my textbooks growing up, come to life in reality. See it right in front of me, see the pyramids, see everything that I read about. I'd love to go through the Valley of the Kings, I'd love to go through Cairo, I'd love to go through Luxor, I'd love to do all of these things, and it would just be probably one of the best things I will have ever done as a tourist. Now, I have heard a lot of scary things about being a tourist in Egypt. I just though feel like it has to be done. All right, we are coming down now to the final few questions. I'd love to know if you have certain routines that you stick to, how you plan out your day or week, and how you stay motivated to stick to it. You seem to have endless energy and productivity, which I need to tap into. I love that this is a recurring question because it means that a lot of you feel this way about me. So it must be true. So, no, well, I don't know, but it makes me very grateful to know that a lot of you feel like this about me. Just to reiterate in summary, I do have routines that I stick to, which I've already answered, but itemized day-to-day routines, week-to-week routines, and month-to-month routines. Things that I need to have done every day. Of course, every day is different. Things that I need to have done every week and things that I need to have done every month. So for example, Monday through to Sunday, I will have each day itemized as what needs to be achieved on that day. Of course, that has to fit in with work. I actually don't know why I didn't just get my diary from the start and show you guys this. Now, it's a little bit battered because as you can probably see here, this is where my pen slots in. And so it cuts a little bit of the book and the paperwork. But these are my routines. Now, these are the paper ones that are written into my book. However, I also have them printed and stuck up in my bedroom and in my office. But to explain in a little bit more detail, I have, so my day-to-day routine. It is itemized from 6:30 in the morning through to 11 p.m. at night, what needs to be done. Now, Saturday and Sunday is a lot more flexible and a lot more at liberty for me to be quite free with what I do. Then if you look at the week, for example, Monday's goal is to make sure all my content is prepared for the week. I have to bulk edit, I have to bulk plan. Tuesday is when I do all my lesson planning for my students. Now, a lot of the time it doesn't all fit into just being done on a Tuesday because there will be other things I need to add in, but that will happen during the day before each student comes. And on Tuesday, I also have to do the groceries. On Wednesday, I have to do a bulk clean out of the garden and make sure I practice piano sufficiently. I do also practice piano every day, but on Wednesday specifically is when I have to dedicate a minimum of an hour. Thursday is when I go visit my teta, and I also dedicate that day to doing my writing. So any spare time that I have once I've completed my daily routine, I will then also fit in writing. So for example, the time allocated on a Monday to do content, or Tuesday to do groceries, Wednesday to do the garden, etc. On Thursday, I will write. On Friday is when the whole house gets cleaned. I get cleaned too. My hair usually gets washed on a Friday. A lot of the time lately, I'll be washing it during the week, so twice a week now too. But usually it was just on a Friday. I will go and shave, I will clean my retainer, I will do my eyebrows, like all those things with myself that need to be done all get done on a Friday. And then in terms of what needs to be done on a monthly basis, at the start of every month, my bed gets stripped and I change the bed sheets. I do change my pillowcases weekly, but the whole thing gets changed monthly. My car has to get cleaned. I get my teeth whitened at home with a home kit once a month, and every 3 months I get my lashes lifted. So do you see what I mean when I say that every single aspect of my life is itemized? When I stay on routine, that makes me very productive, and that feeling of being productive is what gives me what you're referring to here about that motivation and energy and productivity. Okay, it is the only thing that I find consistently fuels my motivation in life. Being productive makes me happy. Being able to achieve things drives me. If you can hear something quacking away outside, that is my ducks. But yeah, the routines that I have in place that as a consequence result in a lot of productivity, that is what motivates me, that is what drives me, that is what keeps me going. All right, we are down to the last 4 questions. Wow. I hope you are well. Thank you. I hope you are too. I know this isn't part of your normal content, but you are an ex-vegan, or why did you go back to eating meat, animal products? Was there a particular reason, if you're comfortable? Okay. Yes, I was a vegan at one point in my life. About 10 years ago, I was a vegan for 2 years. I was a vegan for the last 2 years of when I was living with my mother. So essentially it wasn't my choice. That's why I was a vegan. My mum decided that she wanted to be a vegan. She'd watched a documentary that deeply upset her, which I understand. And as a consequence, she wanted the rest of the family to go vegan. And for the most part, we all did. Definitely, I and my siblings all went vegan. And it was something that initially was a huge struggle. But I suppose kind of like giving up UPFs, ultra processed foods, which is, if you don't watch the vlogs, I've mentioned in my vlogs that I've been on a journey with giving up over the last year to 2 years. It's kind of something you eventually get used to, but initially it is quite difficult. Now, fast forward 2 years after that, when I then run away from home and move in with my Irish family are not vegan. And now, being vegetarian, I probably could have maintained, but being a vegan in this household would have not been possible. Remember that when I first ran away from home, I had no money. I also had to take time off of my job that I had at the time because my mother knew where I worked. And of course, I didn't want her being able to have access to me. And so therefore, I didn't work there for a few weeks until I felt comfortable going back. My mother took all of the money that I had growing up, whatever I earned. So I never had money. So when I ran away and moved in here, I had to eat what was ever given to me. Now, that's not to say that I would have liked to have stayed vegan though. I think I would have liked to slowly transition out of it, because coming back out of it after 2 years was actually quite a shock. I remember the first chicken sausage that I ate was quite a bit of a confronting experience, because I hadn't eaten anything like that for 2 years. And now all of a sudden to consume an animal again was a bit, I had had fish, but not chicken, not red meat, and definitely not highly processed meat like sausages. So anyway, I am not a vegan now, and that is my choice. I have chosen not to be now, whereas before it was not my choice. So I hope that answers your question, why and what happened and all of that. It's also something that if I were to ever do again, which I highly doubt, but hypothetically speaking, I would have to do a lot of research into, because I am extremely iron deficient. I don't eat red meat much as it is, unless it's like minced beef or minced lamb. Other than that, I will not touch it. I have a bit of a funny relationship with the texture of meat and the way it makes me feel. And that's got nothing to do with the fact that I was vegan for 2 years. I've always been like that. I think I would be very well suited to being a vegetarian, but I like chicken too much, and even tuna. So anyway, I don't think I would ever do it again. And if I did, I would have to figure out ways to really manage my iron deficiency, because I definitely remember when I was vegan for those 2 years, I was sleeping all the time. I was falling asleep. I'm not exaggerating, on the back of a motorbike. I was that tired. I was that exhausted. Do you feel like your life has changed, your perspective since starting TikTok and becoming so successful? I know who sent in this comment, and thank you so much. I appreciate it, but I would just like to say, in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to content creators, and I don't deny that I've had success in this industry, and I'm very grateful for it, but I'm actually not as successful as I think people think I am. I'm not sure. Anyway, I feel like I just had to preface what I'm going to say with that. However, do I feel like my life has changed, or my perspective since starting TikTok has changed? Well, definitely my life has changed. Without question. I've gone from being able to, from not being able, to work from home full time, to being able to work from home full time, because tutoring pays less than teaching. Now, not substantially, funny enough, but it does pay less nonetheless. However, content creation has been able to fill in that gap. So I am incredibly grateful for that. It has changed my life. It gave me that freedom that perhaps I otherwise wouldn't have. And in regards to perspective, has it changed my perspective? I mean, it's changed me as a person. It's helped me like myself. It's helped me find confidence in just being who I am. I found that in the videos where I would allow myself to be loud and, a little bit out there, for want of a better word, I realized that actually people enjoyed that, people resonated with that, people liked that. And as a consequence, that made me like myself. So it's changed my perspective on me. It changed my need, my feelings of wanting whatever it was, 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago when I started. I think it's 4 or 5 years ago, roughly. I'm not sure. But let's say for 5 years ago, it's changed the things that I thought I needed to do and be, etc. And it's really made me appreciate just being yourself. And that is something that I think people spend a lifetime, and I will continue to spend time on trying to appreciate. But it definitely accelerated that process. It definitely helped me fall in love more with my own cultures. It really influenced that a lot. It helped me find people, friends that were a lot more like me. It helped me create a community of people where we get to come together and heal in terms of childhood trauma, and we get to discuss these things together. It just did a lot of things that I didn't know I needed and that I didn't know it could do. So yes, it's changed my life and it's changed my perspective on myself. How many countries did you visit, and do you have any country you want to go in the future? Similar to something I was asked earlier, but in terms of how many countries I have visited, I think the number 13 is ringing a bell in my mind, but I would have to recount again. So let me think. So from Australia, and I've traveled around Australia, so I'm going to include Australia. I don't, that's cheating, but I've spent a lot of money traveling around Australia, so I want to include it. I've traveled around Australia. I've been to New Zealand, then I went to, I'm going to try and remember in order, the UAE, then I went to England, then I went to France, then I went to Italy, then I went to Austria, Spain, back home, second trip, Spain again, England again, Ireland, Wales. I feel like I'm missing something. Where else have I been? I've been to the Vatican. Does that count? I know it's in Italy, but it's technically its own country. That's also cheating, but I'm going to count it. So is it 11? 11 countries that I've been to? Where did I get the number 13 from? I think it's like, if you take off the Vatican, I have traveled around 10 countries. I genuinely think I'm missing something. Oh, Gibraltar. I've been to Gibraltar. How did I on earth? Look, I'm just going to look at my photos. How did I forget Gibraltar? So Gibraltar will be number 11, unless of course I include the Vatican, then that's 12. But yes, so roughly speaking, I have traveled around 11 countries. And where do I want to go in the future? I already touched on this, but in summary, back to Europe and hopefully to Egypt one day. Last question, and do you know what? I absolutely love that this is the last question. It just feels very full circle and wholesome. What makes you happy? And actually, this is another one of those questions that I feel like I really need to think about. Definitely my first answer is 1000% family. Mostly because I didn't have a family growing up that loved me and that I could love back in the way that I wanted, the way that they deserved, etc. My family now make me so incredibly happy because they are my rock, so to speak. They are my foundation in life. They are the thing that at the end of the day I get to go back home to. I get to go upstairs and sit with my grandparents, have dinner, watch TV, have a cup of tea, and just feel safe. They are my people. They are my best friends. They are my absolute everything. So definitely family comes first. I know I touched on this, but because you've asked about happiness, achieving things makes me happy. Doing things that I always wanted to do growing up and can now do. So making sure that I, publish a book, that I travel, that I do these things that I wanted to do growing up and can now finally achieve as an adult. So achievements. I suppose travel's not an achievement per se. Well, dependent upon your perspective, it is, but let's put that one aside for a minute. But things like starting my own business, becoming a content creator, publishing my book, achievements make me happy. Family, achievements, travel, I'll bring that one back in. Travel makes me so happy. You can see in my room that all the photos from my travels that I've done are everywhere because I love seeing them. It's something that seemed so unrealistic growing up, and then when I was able to do it as an adult, it is invigorating. It is so freeing, liberating. It is just one of the most amazing things that I hope everyone gets the chance to do. So Definitely traveling makes me happy. Building a future makes me happy. Having something to work towards, being with my partner, being with someone that you are compatible with, that makes you happy. And then in turn, you can together work towards something that you want to build for your future. That makes me happy. And my faith makes me happy. I'd like to end on that. My faith makes me happy because then this is the actual reason I choose to mention this here. Not because as a Christian it should, but because let's take an atheist perspective for a second and let's say that they're right, that there is no such thing as religion. Just hypothetically speaking, let's take that argument for a moment. It makes me happy because regardless of whether it is real or not, what prayer provides in my life, the level of peace and calmness that comes from it, is something that nothing else can do. Through prayer and gratitude growing up, my life was saved. And continually as an adult, through prayer and gratitude, my life is bettered. I don't think there's anything else that could provide that in my life other than faith. So I will end finally as the fifth thing. I know you didn't ask for 5 things, I just chose to do that. Faith makes me happy. If you think about, worship music, all I need to do sometimes is put on some music that Hillsong makes and put it on in the background and I could just cry from happiness. It just moves me so much. So yeah. And that is the last of the 30 questions I screenshotted in this category. Can you imagine if I tried, when you consider how long this is, if I tried to do all the categories, there are 8 in one video, you would be here all day. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and thank you if you sent in any questions. I really appreciate that you even care to know these things. That's so incredibly nice. If you have any other questions that you would like to know, please put them in the comment section below. I will do my best to answer absolutely all of you. And if there is anything that I think can fit into any of the coming categories, I will try my best to fit it in there and give you a more in-depth, personalized answer like this. Thank you so much for coming to my TED Talk. No, I'm joking, but imagine how cool would that be? But thank you so much for watching. I hope I have answered all your questions in as much detail and depth as is possible. Let me know if there's anything else you would like to know. Otherwise, until next time, everyone, much love and God bless. Mwah.